Welcome back to the Cage Rage podcast. This is Devin. Riding along with me, as always, is Miguel Iterati. And this weekend we have a really stellar fight night card. One of the best we've had in a while. Here lately, we've had some pretty thin UFC fight night cards that are really top heavy and then kind of thin out midway through the main card and really thin out in terms of name value down the line. But when I look at this fight and the fights that we're going to preview, you've got everything from reinvention stories from past champions. You've got old contenders and old names coming back and trying to reestablish themselves. You've got young contenders that are really trying to establish themselves as new faces in the sport and in the promotion. And we're going to get into all of that. But first, I want to greet Miguel Iterati. See how you've been doing. How you doing, Miguel? You excited for this card as I am?
I am very excited about this card. It's a very good card. The thing is the fight that caught my attention. You're going to realize what I'm talking about because we've been doing this for a while now. But I'm looking forward to Askren and Maya. That's the fight I kind of, had called it as a fight I'd like to see a long time ago, and now that it's happening, I was hoping that was this weekend. I was like, oh, I forgot about this card, but Weidman's an underdog to Reyes, and I think that makes it intriguing because, it's definitely a fight that has Weidman at a crossroads.
It absolutely does, and that is the very first fight that I'm going to pull up here. We got the main event of the evening is going to be Chris Weidman moving up from former UFC middleweight champion, the man who infamously dethroned Anderson Silva and ended his long streak as middleweight champion, going up now to face a undefeated prospect in Dominick Reyes, who's coming in ranked number 4 in this very thin light heavyweight division. Chris Weidman, we got him coming in on he's 1-4 in his last 5, Miguel. He's lost his last fight, very hard knockout loss to Jacare Souza, in a fight that I thought he looked really good in up until the knockout. Jacare looked really good, but I thought his striking never looked better. He's just had some very unfortunate losses and were in fights that he was really competitive in. He lost the Rockhold fight. Infamously, it was a very competitive fight. He threw a stupid spinning back kick, ends up with Rockhold on top of him, pounds him out. He was really competitive in the Gegard Mousasi fight. That ended in a controversial manner, but nevertheless, he lost that. He even hung well with Yoel Romero before literally about dying in the middle of the ring inside Madison Square Garden by the most vicious flying knee I've ever seen in my life. That it was honestly that watching that live was like, man, he's dead. Quit hitting him. But and then he just lost with a bad knockout to Jacare Souza. A lot of people were talking about retirement. He's always been a big middleweight. Now he's going up trying to kind of reinvent himself in a very thin light heavyweight division. Dom Reyes, 11-0, 29 years old, ranked number 4 in this division right now, coming in here 5-0 in the UFC, despite his last fight against Volkan Oezdemir, which was a very controversial win. A lot of people felt he lost that fight. I think yourself included. It was very close. So I remember covering that fight with you. But he's an undefeated young prospect going against a former champion that has some name value. And when you look at this division and you look at the people that are ahead of him, ahead of these guys, you got guys like Anthony Smith, you got Jan Blachowicz, who's already in a fight with Jacare, and you've got people like Alexander Gustafsson hanging out there who retired but now is flirting about coming back. John Jones has nobody to fight with right now unless they were to run it back with Anthony Smith. Thiago Santos is hurt. There's been talks about Rumble Johnson coming out of retirement, and John Jones has even been making tweets about him. I think what's likely is the winner of this fight we could potentially see against John Jones early next year. What do you think, Miguel?
Yeah, I think a lot of things, we might get that, but is it the right thing to do? There are a couple of ways that it could be the right thing to do. If Reyes comes out and wipes the floor with Weidman, then, there'll probably be a call for that fight. I'm just afraid at 12-0, we're going to run into a situation that we've got going on in a couple of different weight classes, and that is, that he's not going to have the experience, to once you get into deep waters and stuff, So I'd like to see them bring him along a little more, and even though it's a lightweight class, Maybe look to have him fight John Jones when he's got 16 fights. 3-4 fights more. I think it would make it more meaningful. And if the kid stays undefeated, then obviously it would add to the hype of the fight. So barring a wipeout of Weidman, he's going to walk into that fight a major underdog because they just haven't done enough work with him. Weidman, the other way around, if Weidman scores a huge win, I think Weidman could talk his way into, at least being a, plus 600, plus, something around there as an underdog to Jones, at least avoid, being a 4-figure underdog kind of thing. And he's got a little bit of pedigree. He was a huge middleweight. He won't be huge, in the lightweight division, but I think, he's got a couple of things. The funny thing about Weidman is he's been kind of a little bit of a bad luck fighter too, with injuries and things like that. So, now could that possibly work to his favor now? Yeah, if the weight cut, now that he's older, if the weight cut's no good for him, maybe 205 is the right weight class for him. And at the end of the day, he's only 14-4. He doesn't have a lot of miles on his ticker, Yeah, he had some surgery. I think he had an arm injury and a few things like that have kept him out and things like that. But not a lot of in-ring wear, a la Donald Cerrone or someone like that. So, maybe if he gets himself together, as you pointed out, he's been looking good even in some of his losses, So, if he comes in at his best, the weight class breaks his way, and, he comes in a little bit stronger, a little bit more comfortable. Reyes is an opponent I think he can also exploit. After you face down Anderson Silva, I don't know that there are going to be too many strikers that you're going to fear one way or another. I mean, could Reyes break through and get him? Sure, of course, But Reyes has also been flat the last couple of performances, so I would like to think that, the other problem here, the scary part is, and I don't want to jinx anybody, I'd like to see Weidman win the fight, and I'm going to pick Weidman. Just, maybe to play devil's advocate. But I hope this doesn't go the Cain Velasquez way, which is you're talking about a guy who's been on and off and injuries and other factors have kept him out of the ring and stuff like that. And he comes in and, it doesn't go his way one way or another, and maybe it happens quick. Maybe he gets knocked out, or maybe, he twists a knee or something like that. Again, the lack of ring time could work against you with rust as well.
Yeah, I look at Chris Weidman, I always have, as kind of a tragedy a little bit because, man, he had a lot of hype. He had a lot of love behind him, dethroning Anderson Silva. He was undefeated. He went after that, and he picked up, obviously, the win in the rematch, which was heartbreaking to watch Anderson Silva snap his leg in half across Chris Weidman's shin. But he beat Vitor Belfort, beat Lyoto Machida. He kind of had this Brazilian legend killer, vibe to him, and he was a champion. Went in there against Luke Rockhold, lost the belt. He's so likable. He was kind of billed as the new All-American fighter, kind of like the new Randy Couture is the way I was comparing him at the time, is that he kind of had this new Randy Couture vibe to him of the All-American wrestler, humble man, really likable. And he was somebody that rose to the top really fast and then fell really fast and hasn't really been able to get it together since then. But I think that you did a good job of bringing up his repertoire of people that he's fought, because that's the one thing that really stands out in this fight is the experience factor. He's been in there, as you mentioned, going against Anderson Silva. If you stand in front of Anderson Silva, you go in there against Yoel Romero. You've been in there with people like Gegard Mousasi and Lyoto Machida. And we've lost Miguel. He'll be back.
I got to when you said Lyoto Machida is when you got cut off here.
Well, I was going to say Lyoto Machida and Gegard Mousasi and Jacare Souza. He's been in there with some great names. Although I will say that Dominick Reyes' resume, things change and they start looking better as they go on. I would have said 6-7 months ago that Dominick Reyes has a name value in terms of who he's beat problem, but after seeing what Ovince St. Preux did last week, or a couple weeks ago, looked really good, and definitely Jared Cannonier is the big name that he's got that he flatlined in the first round. That was really impressive. You got a young contender here. This light heavyweight division, I've criticized it for so long, Miguel, for being so thin. The heavyweight and the light heavyweight division are so thin compared to the other divisions. But I'm starting to see that could change with names like Reyes, names like Walker, Alexander Rakic, which is really being slept on. That guy is a stud. Even Corey Anderson still is developing, I feel like still. There's still some names. Anthony Smith is still in there. There's some younger names that are coming up in this division that I think pose that just with the right time could be potential good foes to sell a big fight with Jon Jones in the future. You brought up, them rushing Dominick Reyes. Even though Reyes is ranked higher, the big hype train in this division right now probably is Johnny Walker. And that's why I think that they might sacrifice Reyes, go ahead and push him into the title fight while they're still grooming who they're really bringing up as their big hype train. Because Reyes, like I said, even though he's higher in the rankings and has actually technically done more, he's got a lot less attention than Walker. But here they are. They're putting him in a main event against a former champion. And I really think the timing makes the most sense. And barring some kind of, unexpected event of like Jon Jones moving up to heavyweight or them just somehow, just rushing a huge fight and just out of nowhere making the Adesanya fight, which I don't think anybody of us expect, or maybe like a Rumble Johnson comes out of retirement and, the UFC just has nothing else to do, so they want to just make that fight. I think the winner of this fight is I'm going to hold to that. I think that probably sets them up to potentially fight Jon Jones early next year.
Yep, a lot to take in there. Jones obviously is the elephant in the room. He's hard to match up, right now, and people may dream of him moving up to heavyweight and stuff like that. He doesn't seem to be predisposed to do that, right? So, what do we got here? What I don't like, just the whole style of approaching this, and the bottom line is you want to rush Reyes in and maybe give Walker one more fight before you rush him in too, basically. You're rushing both of them, At some point, if the weight class were fully flushed out and everything was okay, Rumble Johnson coming back would help with this. But I'd like to see, them slate for December of 2020, a Reyes-Walker matchup, and that sets up the winner to your Jones fight. Both guys would have a lot more pedigree, a couple more fights and things like that, and you'd really see if they were worth it or not. Here it's like, man, we got him into a 3-fight winning streak. We better get him a title fight before we screw it up, they both seem rushed. And I agree with you. When you look down the roster, those are the guys that jump out at you in terms of potential and stuff like that. But don't you want to see it done right?
Yeah, I do. And, Johnny Walker just a couple weeks from now is going to be fighting Corey Anderson, who's ranked, I think, number 6 in the division. And if he gets through that, then all of a sudden you got two rising, and Dominick Reyes gets through this, you're going to have two rising contenders who are near the top of the division now that are coming up. And I agree with you. Let that sizzle. Let those guys get even better, and you've got contenders for Jones for the next couple of years. And I think that's good strategy. Let me ask you this question, though, because you think Weidman's going to win this fight. Does the casual fan and even the hardcore audience, more than the casual fan, is that going to be a fight that's going to be believable to them? Because we've seen Chris Weidman. We just went through a plethora of him losing to Gegard Mousasi and Yoel Romero and Jacare Souza and Luke Rockhold. Is selling him against Jon Jones going to be something that the casual and hardcore fan or either both, are they going to buy this? Is that something that they're going to be able to actually sell, that he's going to move up a weight class and fight Jon Jones now, and that he's going to be a legit contender?
The Jones has that that veneer of being unstoppable, so that it's like you get the feeling Weidman's the next guy, whatever, and then there'll be Reyes afterwards, and then Walker and whoever, and it doesn't really matter that you don't have a lot of a chance. You don't have much of a chance. A lot of it is, what have you done for me lately? So we go back to, he's got to perform against Reyes. I'd like to see him, if he's going to get the fight and they're going to do it anyway, it would be intriguing if he takes Reyes and ragdolls him in about 3 minutes. And then says, yeah, I feel really good at this weight class. And, I'm a former champion myself. And, I haven't gotten, over that taste of the gold. And I'm coming for Jones's because, I'm always open to a challenge and stuff. Yeah, like I said, he does that after a 3-minute wipeout of Reyes. He has a good chance of coming in as low as a minus 600 underdog. You know what I mean? He's still going to be an under. He's got no, in terms of numbers and probability and stuff like that. Wall of John Jones will still be there, but I think that's the scary. The other way around, Reyes bounces back with a 3-minute wipeout of Weidman.
Now they can sell a new top, talented contender. So.
But I think he opens a wider underdog.
Yeah, No matter what, that's going to be what John Jones is going to be dealing with. I think it's going to be like he's in a position like Lomachenko's in, and Terrence Crawford, and some of these top guys in boxing. They're going to be huge favorites wherever they go. But nevertheless, I believe that this is a top contender fight for the light heavyweight division, and I'm definitely excited to see this. Also,
want to take a minute to divert a little bit and talk Anthony Rumble Johnson? You want to save that for later?
We can talk a little bit about Rumble Johnson because he's been talking about, he's wanting to come back. He's signaling heavyweight, saying that he's open to fight Francis Ngannou, but he's also brought up about he would go down to 205 to fight John Jones, and John Jones came out and said, this past week on Twitter, we've been cool, but I'll choke you out. I've always found that fight intriguing, just because I don't think John Jones is going to lose a technical bout. It's going to be somebody that can crack him, like an Ngannou. I've said that for a while now. But Anthony Johnson is an amazing hammer. Doesn't do good as a nail. And Daniel Cormier showed that Anthony Johnson will look for a way out of a fight. It'd be different styles, definitely a different fight. But I would be intrigued to watch it, and if they, I would actually I might even call Anthony Johnson over Francis Ngannou if they fought. Anthony Johnson, man, hits you, it's a wrap. I mean, he's got maybe the best power I've ever seen inside the UFC cage. But John Jones is somebody that's, if your only game plan is to knock him out, might be the only game plan you have. So I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Rumble Johnson is intriguing to me mainly for the reason I outlined in the very beginning of the chapter, and that is as a stopgap while Reyes and Walker develop a little further.
That's good.
You keep Jones busy. If he breaks through with Johnson, then you got more development time for these guys, which I don't think is a bad thing because so Jones loses to Johnson, and then you got to go back and give Jones his rematch and stuff, and that extends itself. And that's the true value of finding something credible now for John Jones, is that you can let that other stuff really simmer. If not, you're left with little choice but to rush a guy in with 12 fights against John Jones. And, at that point, you're starting to look at, minus 1,200 and the UFC doesn't really do that. If you look at their cards and things like that, they like for it to be more intriguing when it goes in, especially, I know the sport books are just one perspective, but if they're going to give you $1,200 for a $100 bet, there's a good chance that guy's not going to win. You know what I mean? Because the sport books are not dumb. They're there business and they're not there to throw money away. So it really has to be, and that's what you're looking at with Jones that way. Johnson, I remember Johnson was about a plus 300 underdog with Jones. So the people were giving him a lot of credit for his power. You're right. The problem with him is sometimes the gut check when the going gets tough, he's going to say, I'll opt to fight another day kind of thing. And not that that's, the worst way to go about things professionally, but it's also kind of like the type of habit that, coming back after retirement and stuff. I don't think that's what he's fixing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like he didn't all of a sudden find heart and fire, especially, he's got a little bit, he was doing better than he was when he started his career, So I think he's just a stopgap. If he breaks through, you got a little bit of a storyline, but the real future there is the Reyes and the Walkers and the Eastern Europeans that are coming up.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that analysis, and I will say this: it makes good business sense because that fight sells. That fight sells even with Rumble Johnson being out. People know that name. People know that he's dangerous. It doesn't matter that he's been beat, and we've seen him quit in fights, like with 2 times against DC. People know he's dangerous. People know that John Jones is going to be leaps and bounds ahead of pretty much anybody he fights. But there is a potential, he is human, of getting cracked. It's intriguing. I mean, and like you said, that's bringing that up as like a stopgap of somebody that just to bear some time. Not only are you going to get a lucrative fight out of it, but you're also going to potentially get another, notable name in the light heavyweight history that John Jones can add to his legacy, and you let these younger talent develop. So I think it works great. We'll just see if that ends up happening, what Rumble Johnson's going to do. He looks like he's weighing probably 250, 260 pounds. He looks huge.
He's big, yeah. The thing about Johnson to me, though, is it depends because the UFC, obviously, sometimes philosophically you could be, different, but you can't say they're wrong or right. You just go down a different path. But I would avoid Johnson and Ngannou at all costs. There's no reason at this point, not for Johnson's first fight. If Johnson comes in and beat Jones, then maybe, you could do Johnson and Ngannou. But why risk Ngannou in that, in that situation? Because as you said, he can get cracked. And Ngannou's the guy probably of the bunch with more upside at this point if you're able to, exploit that the full way.
The only thing I don't like about that fight is that's one of those type of fights. If they fought 10 times, there's a real possibility it could be 5-5, because those guys are so powerful that you're not really going to get a technique for technique back and forth.
And you might not see. You're not going to see very much difference in the 10 fights either. I think they all go 1 or 2 rounds.
Or the other possibilities that it turns out, like when they put Ngannou in there against Derek Lewis, and it was the worst 3-round fight in the history of the UFC, and they did nothing because they were so tentative of each other. Which, looking back at that Derek Lewis actually was awarded that decision, which blows my mind because I thought for sure that Ngannou was a taller, longer, faster. We're getting sidetracked here a little bit, but I definitely think that Rumble is the curveball in this division, but I do like that there's new talent coming up, and Chris Weidman going in there and dethroning one of them this weekend would definitely send some shockwaves in that division. But moving on to the big co-main event, because this was a main event just last month. Last September, we had a main event of a fight night between Yair Rodriguez and Jeremy Stephens, and it unfortunately ended in 15 seconds due to an eye poke. And Jeremy Stephens was poked in the eye down in Mexico. They rain the cage with, plastic cups and food and everything out of frustration for the main event getting canceled. But, it was an unfortunate ending to a great main event. They're going to run this back now. Yair's coming into this fight ranked number 7 in the featherweight division. Jeremy Stephens coming in ranked number 8 in the division. Jeremy Stephens is 33 years old. Get this. I looked up their resume, figured out their UFC records. Jeremy Stephens is 28-16 in MMA. He is 15-15 in the UFC. He's got a 500 record with 30 fights in the UFC on a 2-fight losing streak. Yair Rodriguez, he's another one. That's why I said that this card has a lot of storylines. You got Chris Weidman, the old champ. Jeremy Stephens, the old vet. And then you got Dominick Reyes and Yair Rodriguez, 2 potential stars, 2 potential champions of their divisions. 27 years old, ranked number 7, 7-1 in the UFC. His lone loss, a tough loss to Frankie Edgar when he was about 24 years old, about 3 years ago. So Yair Rodriguez has been a top prospect since his time in The Ultimate Fighter. And I think we're going to see the best version of himself. He's coming off one of the craziest knockouts in UFC history, knocking out the Korean Zombie at 4:59 of the 5th round with one of the craziest uppercut elbows I've ever seen in my life in a very exciting fight. And Jeremy Stephens always packs a big punch, a lot of power, is going to be coming to this fight with a with a lot of intensity after what happened down in Mexico. So they're running this back. We talked a lot about this about a month ago, but here we are again with I'm glad that they set this up, got it going pretty fast. But here we are, co-main event. Yair Rodriguez taking on Jeremy Stephens. What do you got, Miguel?
Yeah, really fast. More of this, and by this I mean anytime a fight ends, in an eye poke or in some type of way that's dissatisfactory, I'm all for running it again on short notice, making sure that the guys fight and get the job done properly. If it derails, title aspirations or whatever, so be it. Don't eye poke, But I think it doesn't leave the open question of, that fight ended as a no contest and stuff. At least you get a satisfying ending out of it. Contractually, it's not always easy to do, I'd like to see it be a little bit more of the contract. If there's a no contest that ends in the first 30 seconds of the fight, whatever time frame you want to put in the contract, you're going to be forced to fight that opponent again at a show the UFC is choosing within the next month. If the eye poke didn't cause surgery and you don't have eye damage, it was just incidental, you just couldn't fight that day, then there's no reason to not do that. So I think it should be a policy. The fighter should be contracted to do that. And I hope that might prevent a little bit of the eye poking that we've seen, because it's become very prevalent, because other than that, there's really not much that you can do. In terms of the fight, I think Jeremy Stephens, you said he's 15-15. I think he's a guy that maybe you motivated him just right with this whole Mexico City incident and stuff like that. And now, whereas you had him coming in for just another fight, now he's motivated. Maybe we'll see a special performance out of him. It's just about time, for Jeremy Stephens again to do, pull one out of a hat. I agree with you. If that happens, that will knock the trajectory right, off its path for Rodriguez. And, he's been, on an upward trajectory now for a little bit.
Yeah, when I look at this featherweight division, it's another division just like with light heavyweight that I see a lot of potential young talent coming up. I mean, Max Holloway, he's still young himself, and he's up there dominating the division, but he's facing another young contender in Alexander Volkanovski. We got names like Zabit that are coming up. We got names like Yair Rodriguez. There was a lot of talk about that fight happening. Calvin Kattar's another young guy. So there's some exciting things going on in this featherweight division. And Jeremy Stephens has always been a gamer. That's what the one thing that really bothered me was the fans' response to that being called off, because Jeremy Stephens isn't back out of a fight. Jeremy Stephens isn't looking to get himself out of any fight. He's been in there with the best of the best for years. He's always been a gamer. This is the type of fight he likes. But at the same time, I've seen him get beat by strikers before, but I think Jose Aldo comes to mind real quick, getting dropped with a liver shot. But Yair is a special talent. And I've known that since he was a young kid fighting on the Ultimate Fighter, and he's only gotten better. And I think that there's a chance that we have been underestimating how good the Korean Zombie is too, because
I'm a big Korean Zombie fan, so yeah.
So am I, and that was a great fight between those two. And I actually had, if it wasn't for that knockout at the very end of the fifth round, I might have given that. I remember thinking the decision was probably going to go to the Korean Zombie, and but it was a war. Yair showed that he can stay in the flames. We haven't seen him fight somebody like Frankie Edgar since he has lost to Frankie Edgar, where he really struggled with the takedown. But man, he loves these type of fights too. And Yair is so creative on the feet. He mixes it up with such different unorthodox techniques. He really flows like water in a Bruce Lee way with his techniques. He's so fluid, uses all of his limbs, all the points. He uses elbows, knees. He does a lot of acrobatic type of techniques. Very loose in there. Great.
He's unorthodox,
very unorthodox. And you got more of a traditional, just heavy-handed puncher style in Jeremy Stephens. And Jeremy Stephens' 2-fight losing streak against Zabit and Aldo, those are no punks. And I would say the experience factor is definitely on the side of Jeremy Stephens, but this could be a breakout moment for Yair. And I think moving forward, he's going to be fighting a top 5 contender if he's impressive here.
Yeah, I think, the whole Mexico City thing, like you said, it's unfortunate. It does have to do with the UFC and the way they market the sport. The bottom line is when they go, have they decided to go to Mexico and say, look, we're going to do 6 or 8 shows in Mexico every year, at fight night level arenas, with 6,000 or 8,000 people, build up people and build up stars? No, they kind of rush a few stars here and there, and are trying to sell out Mexico City arenas, right off the bat and stuff like that. And what does that mean? You're going to get to a crossover audience, and an audience that's not following the stories or anything like that. And at that point, you're in Mexico City. Who are they going to root for? The Mexican, obviously. So there's no joke. There's no real surprise with what happened. You get a dissatisfying ending. Now all of a sudden you've got everybody in the audience is not happy. So like I said, it just you take the good with the bad, but when you're going to try and hit a home run every single time with ticket sales, and things like that, 4 live events that they won't be back at Mexico City for a little while now, and things like that until they develop. So while they're in those types of arenas, they're trying to hit a home run every single time, and I don't know that that's the right case, and they're not building fans, they're crossing over, and people are going for the spectacle, not the sport.
For sure. And, they've been, with seeing Cain Velasquez move on to the WWE, and, a lot of talk this week in MMA media about the what ifs of Cain Velasquez, where at one point many people believed that in his prime, what we saw for the short window, those couple of years, may have been the best version of an MMA heavyweight we've ever seen. I mean, he was so good, so dominant, but it fizzled out so fast with injuries, and he got hurt. They've been desperate for a transcendent Mexican star for that audience. That's very, very much a very big boxing audience down there. And they've been wanting their MMA crossover. And I think that they want they have a lot of hopes for Yair Rodriguez, and moving him down there. They were hoping for, as you said, a lot of fireworks, but didn't turn out good. And it turned out to be an ugly night. But I'm glad they're running this back. It's going to be a great compliment to a good main event. A lot of people are very much looking forward to that. And after what happened, it's definitely right that they're doing that. But moving on from here, as I said, this card has a lot of stories, and it has a lot of potential new names coming up. We gave this man a lot of criticism, rightly so, for domestic battery charges and stuff, and his previous time in the NFL and the UFC putting him on co-main events and stuff. Well, he's on another main card now, but he's somewhat kind of a little bit different now because, he's definitely seeming like he loves this stuff, man. He's got a couple big wins, smashed guys real quick in his last 2 fights. This is going to be, I believe, his 4th fight of the year. Greg Hardy is back at heavyweight against Ben Sosoli, who is making his UFC debut, 7-2, 29 years old. Hardy 31, 5-1 in MMA, 2-1 in the UFC now on a 2-fight win streak. Hardy's looked like he's improving. Apparently he's been in the gym. He's been training. We all know that he's a very fantastic athlete. He's going to have a lot of potential. He's still a young man. We know heavyweights age late. It's a very thin division. He's a very big man too, with a lot of power apparently. But we saw in his UFC debut that if he faces some adversity, he gassed out and got himself out of that fight. But he's back, and could the UFC? I mean, they're bringing him up slowly against people who've never even fought in the UFC before, don't have much of a name, don't have a lot of experience. I mean, they're bringing him up right, letting him get some experience. If he keeps winning, I mean, are they gonna? I mean, could you see a day where Greg Hardy is a star at heavyweight for the UFC?
Yeah, I mean, he has a certain top side, I guess. I mean, you got to keep winning and you got to keep competing. At some point, the rhetoric about all the previous problems and I guess a failed NFL career, whatever you want to call it, as well, and stuff will. When he has 15 fights, people stop talking about some of that stuff. And I think you got to get from here to 15 fights. I think that's what the UFC is doing wrong, is that a guy with this level, many fights, even if he's a guy with potential or whatever, does not belong on the main card. He doesn't even really belong in the UFC if, the same rules apply across the board, right? He should be fighting on, Legends Fighting Championship or whatever regional show. He's from Tennessee. He can fight on Jonathan Ivy's show a couple of times. You know what I mean? But the point is a guy with 5 or 6 fights who's this raw. It's not like he's got, family and 15, 20 years in martial arts and stuff like that. He's coming over just as a raw athlete. He shouldn't be in the UFC. So that's the real problem to me is when you present in a main event fight, then all of a sudden all the other stuff comes aboard. And there's really not much else to talk about other than that he was with the Cowboys and that, he was a controversial figure that ran into trouble with the law.
Yeah, that's true. And, he definitely obviously has gotten some preferential treatment. That's been well documented. It's just, as just an objective, if I take all that knowledge out and just look at what he's doing so far in the UFC, he's had a couple quick knockouts. And if he gets a third one, there's going to be some attention on him as being, somebody that might even be getting a top 15 ranked opponent soon because this division is so thin. I mean, so thin. When we look at heavyweight, I'm pulling up the rankings right now real quick just to see, some names that are at the bottom of this division. When we look at like the heavyweight top 15, at the very bottom, we got names like Sergey Spivak and Sergey Pavlovich and Maurice Green and Alexei Olenek and Augusto Sakai and Walt Harris. I don't think we should throw him in there against Walt Harris anytime soon. But, I mean, some of those names.
I'd avoid Olenek, too.
Yeah, but he's in his 40s and he just got knocked out and he's
with 100 fights. If he extends them, that's the problem is with Hardy, you're kind of afraid of anybody who can actually extend them.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and but I do think when we look at some of those guys, we see that typical heavyweight mixed martial artist look that we have from the middle of the pack guys, the journeymen. They're bigger, they're slower, they aren't very good athletes. They got some good skill, but you can tell that they clearly don't have too many training partners that are their size to really work them. They've got some game, but with somebody like Greg Hardy, I believe that this is the only division, I've said it forever, heavyweight is the only division that somebody like him can come in with very little raw experience, just raw as a football player, as just a really good athlete and still be successful because it's such a thin, weak division that, that will get you very far. If you're just game and athletic with a lot of power and you're teachable, you can go pretty far. And I think that's what we're going to see with Greg Hardy, but I'm not a big fan of the man. I actually gave him the benefit of the doubt before his UFC debut, but the way he conducted himself in his UFC debut and afterwards, I haven't been a very big fan of him, but I do think that there's a lot of potential underlying upside with him going forward. Moving on from here, we got kind of a comeback that, I guess he just wants to get his feet wet one more time. You got Joe Lauzon taking on Jonathan Pearce. I don't want to take too much time here. You got Joe Lauzon, 35 years old, former Ultimate Fighter standout. It's been around for a long time, 14-12 in the UFC, but he's coming in here on a 3-fight win streak. He's been very inactive over the past several years. Jonathan Pearce is a 27-year-old, 9-3 in MMA. Will be his UFC debut. He's coming off a Contender Series win from this past year's Contender Series 2019. He's on a 5-fight win streak, so they're bringing in a Contender Series standout and giving him a Joe Lauzon, a familiar name from the past, and Lauzon wants to fight, so they're going to throw him in there against this kid. It's pretty clearly to me that they're going to try to make a name off of Joe Lauzon with Jonathan Pearce, 27 years old, making his debut. And I'm fine with it if Joe Lauzon wants to do this, but Lauzon, I think is definitely obviously past his prime, but it'd be cool to see him come back and get a big win.
It depends. It always depends. It's like, what is the UFC's intention in this match? Is it to bring Lauzon back and Pearce? I don't have the benefit of having seen Pearce, so I missed the the Contender Series fight. And the bottom line there is what kind of potential and upside does Pearce have? So if Pearce is just not a guy that you expect to be on the roster in 10 years, then yeah, maybe you feed him to Lauzon, let Lauzon go out in style or whatever. But if he has a lot of potential and you want to bring him in, then Lauzon may not be the right opponent. The bottom line with Lauzon and guys like this is, you've got a few examples of guys, like Glover Teixeira in this own weight class. You've got Jim Miller, who recently pulled off a big win and would qualify as a Lauzon level veteran. Sometimes those attempts by those veterans go south and they don't go right. So it just kind of depends. Are you taking a chance with Lauzon, and you Pearce is somebody you want to work with? Because, like I said, what's the intention of the UFC in this match? And like I said, and with Lauzon, I think is very capable of a Jim Miller type of renaissance in that, style-wise, there are great shots of Lauzon, all bloody and fights and things like that and stuff like that. But, if he can get you on the ground and stuff like that and stay safe, he'll still be dangerous to anybody.
Yeah, I don't mean that as a disrespect to Joe Lauzon. He's been in there for years and has always been an exciting caliber fighter, but just the way he looked against Chris Gutzmeyer in his last fight and, Clay Guida, Stevie Ray, those are his last 3 losses. He's just kind of – and he's not been very active. He's only had – those 3 fights were over the period since April of 2017. So that was almost 2.5 years. He's and he's had 3 fights in 2.5 years, and all 3 of them were losses. So, but as you said, we've seen this before. We've seen these old names – take on some of these younger talent, and it doesn't go the way the UFC expected, and that's what makes them fun. But that's definitely what we have there, thrown in there in the middle of the main card. Opening up the main card, I believe, and I could be wrong about that. They might have a 6-fight main card, and it might be Deron Winn, who is on the. I am wrong about that. Deron Winn is opening up the card, but second on the main card is a fight that I believe is definitely pivotal right now to the women's flyweight division. And it's a bout between Maycee, the future Barber, coming back, 21 years old now. She's officially old enough to buy alcohol, taking on Gillian Robertson, who's not far from her. She's 24 years old. You got Maycee Barber coming in ranked number 12 in the division, and you got Gillian Robertson coming in ranked number 15. Maycee Barber came off the Dana White Contender Series and is now 2-0 in the UFC. Both of them impressive finishes. Gillian Robertson's won her last 2 fights. She's 4-1 in the UFC. Maycee Barber's come out and made bold statements saying she's going to be the youngest champion in UFC history, and she's going to be bigger than Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey, and she's had a lot of hype behind her. And when we look at this division, we know we've been calling it the Valentina division here on the CRP because there's not a division that's more dominant by the champion right now. You got Valentina Shevchenko sitting on top of this division. Underneath her, you got a talented girl as a number 1 contender, Caitlin Chukagian. Underneath that, you got Jessica Ai, who she flatlined. Under that, Joanne Calderwood, who's a good fighter, but not really, I don't think, title contender. Number 4, Liz Carmouche, just got beat by Valentina. Jennifer Maia, Vivian Arreo, Andrea Lee, Roxanne Modafferi, Lauren Murphy, Alexis Davis, Montana De La Rosa, and then you got Maycee Barber at number 12. This division desperately, and it's not going to come in the next 6 months. It's going to have to be in the next year, 2, 3. They need a new upstart. They need somebody that's going to come up, that's going to be developed, that's going to be somebody that's going to be gravitating a lot of attention on them. That's going to be somebody that's going to be able to potentially make a big fight for Valentina down the line. I have said that the only person that I see out of the younger women's fighters right now, north of 115 pounds, is Maycee Barber. And it's because of her age. She just turned 21 years old. Her last fight that we covered with her back in the spring, she was only 20 years old. And she's already got a couple wins in the UFC. But she needs a lot. She needs some time, but she's developing pretty fast. I'm definitely interested to see this fight because this is going to be her toughest fight yet. Gillian Robertson's getting some experience underneath her. 5 fights in the UFC for a woman, you're starting to get some decent experience. I believe that, the most fights some women have are like 9, 10, 11 fights. They're not like the men who have, some of them have near 30 fights. Women's MMA has not been in the UFC but 6, 7 years. So some of these girls are starting to get some experience behind them, get some wheels, get some tread on the tires at a pretty young age. And I think this fight's going to be pretty pivotal going forward. I think, and the only fear that I have, we talked about this with Dominick Reyes and Johnny Walker and them. One of these girls, one of these young, attractive, talented young girls are going to win this fight, and they're going to look at that division. They're going to start trying to push them too fast, especially somebody like Maycee Barber. Maycee Barber goes in here, and I'm glad that she's fighting somebody lower in rank. That shows that they aren't recognizing that she's 21 years old. She's got some time to advance. They could potentially have a good name here with her, and they're not trying to push her up the ranks too fast. But I think if she's impressive here, Miguel, and she's got a 3-0 record with 3 finishes, and people really start noticing her, we might see her against a Roxanne Modafferi. We might see her against a Jennifer Maia. We might see her against a Joanne Calderwood or somebody that propels her into like top 5 rankings. And then, she might be 22 years old and they're wanting to throw her in there with Valentina. And I think that would be a mistake.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you're looking about, basically different generations, right? And I think that's the way when you look, it'll be looked at historically. That's kind of, I think, the right way to look at it. They should bring her along, just like we've been talking about Reyes and Walker and people like that. Rather than rush her into a title fight, they should probably be looking to match her up against some other up-and-comers and things like that. Now, in terms of Robertson, I think, when you're 7-3 as a pro, that, prodigy shine has come off a little bit. You've taken a couple of losses, but at 24, I think you're right. She's still intriguing. 4-1 in the UFC, and that's nothing to sneeze at, as you also pointed out. And then, in addition to that, she's, her resume could be sneaky because she's got a lot of amateur fights, when you look at it, and that's unusual, especially for women and stuff like that. So now you're talking about, a girl with, comparable to maybe Jeremy Stevens type experience when you take into account that the women, always have a little bit less competition and things like that and availability and things. But that's a lot of fights. And we'll see if the UFC, judged that Barber is ready for someone like that. Because like you said, I think Barber's the better fighter and obviously has more upside and things when you take into account everything. But, maybe they made a mistake in terms of, putting her in with a real veteran, the Diego Sanchez effect, so to speak.
Yeah, and I do definitely agree with your idea of like generations. And one thing we see in boxing right now is a lot of talk about Lomachenko fighting Tank Davis. And I don't know how many times I've heard reputable voices that analyze boxing say like, man, Tank is a kid, compared to, when you look at the experience, yeah, he's a talented fighter, but he's a kid compared to Lomachenko. That's how I see about the prospect. Even if Maycee Barber, who I definitely, like I said, she just turned 21. By the time she's 24, 25, if all things go right, she stays injury-free, she's, developing well. She should be a very, very formidable force for women's MMA. But, she's still, she's a kid. She's a kid. And I hope that the UFC, like I said, one good indication that the UFC is getting better with this and not just, oh, money. Let's hype them. Let's use our hype train to put money behind them and promote them like they're a viable contender when they're just, they're still not developed the way they should. Let's just rush them so we have somebody for her to fight and we can sell a fight. Maybe that they're getting a little bit better about that is that she is fighting down in rank. And, that to me is an indication that they know she needs some experience behind her. So Maycee, the future Barber, whether she's really truly the future has yet to be seen. But I think she's got her toughest challenge, as you mentioned, with a girl who's got a lot of experience, a tough young fighter. I've seen her fight before. She's very talented. And she's only 24 years old. If she wasn't fighting Maycee Barber, we'd be talking about how young she is and her upside. So 24 years old, Gillian Robertson, with more cage experience inside the UFC than Maycee does. So this is a good fight. I'm really looking forward to that one. But opening up the card, we got another very hot prospect. I mean, this is just a card full of potential names. Dominick Reyes, Yair Rodriguez, Greg Hardy could be a star. Jonathan Pearce is yet to be seen. Maycee Barber. And now we got Deron Winn, a decorated wrestler who is highly touted by everybody around him. First time I seen him was on the Liddell Ortiz pay-per-view that Golden Boy did. That was just pitiful, but he made his debut there, then made his UFC debut and won that pretty handily. Very standout wrestler, fighting at 185 pounds, 6-0 in MMA, 1-0 in the UFC. He's taken on Darren Stewart, 28 years old, 10-4 in MMA, 3-4 in the UFC with 1 no contest. So you got a decent step up here for Darren Winn, taking on a guy who's got eight UFC fights under his belt. But Deron Winn, somebody that's definitely hyped. I think they're wanting to get some miles on him. He's only got 6 MMA fights, but we know these wrestlers, they're born competitors. He's got a lot more than just 6 MMA fights. I mean, he's somebody with a decorated pedigree, and we know what he's going to do. It's just, with these wrestlers, the cool thing about them is you know what they're going to do, but can you stop it? Deron Winn is in that category of a Ben Askren, of a Daniel Cormier, of some of these guys that are just highly decorated wrestlers that are going to be really hard to stop their game. So he could be an interesting addition to the 185-pound division, and he's going to open up the main card this week, taking on Darren Stewart. Miguel.
Going back to 1992, in the 1992 Olympic wrestling team, I think they had Mark Coleman, Kevin Jackson, Townsend Saunders, all those three. One more, those name is escaping me right now, but all those guys did MMA. And, especially with Kevin Jackson and Townsend Saunders, I'm not disrespecting Mark Coleman and saying that those guys were the guys that medaled. Coleman didn't get to medal. Coleman was a rugged wrestler, not the most technically sound wrestler. Once you get to a certain level, I mean, he was awesome, obviously. But there were guys that were a little better. But what Coleman had was he had that dog, too. And Townsend Saunders didn't quite have that dog in him. He was more of a technical, a thinker. And sometimes MMA is about instinct and not thinking. And the point is that wrestling pedigree does not automatically make you MMA ready. And a lot of that has to do with mindset and the type of person and athlete that you are, Excellent wrestlers have come over and not done well. And then, wrestlers that have had guys that are better wrestlers than them come over and they go right into MMA. So we're going to find out more about Deron Winn and the kind of mindset that he brings to this because it is a little bit different, So we'll see. More power to him. Love to see it. Love to see when guys come over with the type of discipline that it takes to get to that level of wrestling, because that can only be a good thing, It's much better than I got off the bar and came in to fight, That doesn't work anymore. You got to be disciplined.
Yeah, and if it wasn't for his background, I would say that the pressure might be hurting him. But to be coming in and you've only had 1 or 2 fights and you're getting compared to the great Daniel Cormier, that's saying a lot, and that's who a lot of people are comparing him to. And Daniel Cormier was somebody who came in and, he definitely adapted to the MMA game. And it was seen very fast when he's thrown into Strikeforce Grand Prix and he's knocking out Bigfoot Silva and throwing Josh Barnett around and comes to the UFC and dominates every heavyweight that he gets put against and goes down and dominates at light heavyweight. And so Deron Winn, the upside's amazing. Like I said, the people around him, that's who they're comparing him to. He's the new DC. We've got a new Daniel Cormier at middleweight waiting for us, but time will yet to be seen. It's like I said, this card, Miguel, the overall theme with me is you got some older veterans that are making kind of a last stand type of thing. They're coming back. They're trying to reinvent themselves, reestablish themselves as legit forces. And you got a lot of potential names. I mean, this might be a card that we look back in the future and we're saying, wow, there was a lot of names on that card that night. I mean, names like Deron Winn and Maycee Barber, who have a lot of hype behind them, and Yair Rodriguez and Dom Dominick Reyes, and even Greg Hardy, as I mentioned, and maybe even Jonathan Pearce. So I think there's a lot of potential names to look. And when I'm watching this main card this weekend, that's what I'm going to be watching for. Who out of these young contenders that we just broke down, who do I really think could? I mean, I think that's something we're going to cover in our post fight. Is okay. What do we see? What do we see out of these kids? Who could really be that breakthrough star that we could be seeing at the top of the division in years to come? So I always find that exciting when we have cards like this.
Yeah, no, definitely one to watch. Definitely, like I said, I'm psyched for the following week as well. So,
yeah,
I guess you could just call me a UFC mark.
Well, you've been calling that fight forever. That you said that the great matchmaker himself, Miguel Arati, said that's the fight that he would make, and it's they must have been listening because that's the fight that we're going to get. So, but until then, we got Dom Reyes greeting Chris Weidman at light heavyweight this weekend. We've got Yair Rodriguez and Jeremy Stevens. Hopefully this fight actually happens this time. We got Greg Hardy, the notorious domestic batter coming back and for his 4th UFC fight. Joe Lauzon's returning to greet Jonathan Pearce. Maycee, the future Barber, will take on Gillian Robertson, and Deron Winn, the next DC, according to some people that are around him, will open the card against Darren Stewart. This has been Devin. This has been the CRP. And stay tuned. We will be back this Saturday night or Sunday, one of the days, and we will recap this card and preview next weekend. Talk to you soon, Miguel.
Thanks a lot. And, enjoy the fights, everybody. We'll be here after the fights to talk repercussions.
Talk to you soon.